Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our spotlight session on civil military cooperation and coordination. I would like to just repeat one or two things on the chat. Please use the chat vividly. My colleague Darina will monitor it and come back to the stage by the end of the session. Mute your microphones and your cameras, and if there are any technical issues, please don't hesitate to write a message to the user chat technical support. So I'm very, very happy to have the great opportunity to engage with Menna, Seged, Abraha for the second time in what about, I think, 2 months, and also to be able to engage with her on the very important topic of civil-military coordination. It's one of the aspects that is continuously thrown into the ring in discussing the Triple Nexus, but its intimate relationship to Triple Nexus programming is seldomly discussed, I would say. Even our own CHAR survey on the Triple Nexus shows quite interesting results with regards to questions of civil-military coordination. 2/3 of the respondents evaluate the extent to which the Triple Nexus blends concepts of peace with security, counterterrorism, and stabilization, and the respective actors as likely or very likely. This is like more than 60%. At the same time, roughly the same percentage of people report that so far the Triple Nexus activities of their organizations did not lead to a reassessment concerning guidelines of civil-military cooperation. Let's put these two things together, and I think it's quite obvious why we have to talk about this. To discuss this further, as I said, I'm tremendously happy to welcome Menna, Seged, Abraha. I will briefly introduce her to the audience. Menna is head of advocacy with Action Against Hunger Spain since the year 2014. During the last few years, she has focused intensely, especially on the West African region and some thematic dossiers such as the Triple Nexus. She has over 12 years of experience in human rights and international humanitarian aid, and in international and national organizations such as Amnesty International, the International Organization for Migration, or the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, as well as with national civil society organizations, especially in Ethiopia. She has a background in law and an LLM in human rights, conflicts and justice from the School of Oriental and African Studies that Marc Dubois is affiliated to as well. So there's another link to this at the University of London. Menna, a warm welcome. So let's start the discussion with a short input from your side. Why are new perspectives on civil-military cooperation and coordination necessary from your point of view?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrea, for having me, and especially on this very interesting and very timely topic. Why do we, a new perspective on civil military coordination, why is it necessary? For me, I think that we need to look at the challenges that we have on the ground in terms of the increased vulnerability and the increased volatility we see in the Sahel. That's the region where I focus. And at the same time, the global trend that we are seeing on Triple Nexus that has garnered a lot of attention and momentum, and this and some controversy. And this session is and this conference of today, I think, is testament to this importance that it's gaining. Yet somehow on the ground, we are seeing that it's being translated into mostly, with a security-first approach. So I think tackling civil military coordination is really central to understanding also what are those limits that we have, and in connection with the challenges that we have. So in terms of what I was saying, in terms of increased volatility, I'll talk about very quickly in the Sahel. It's a region marked by high levels of insecurity towards civilians, humanitarians, and humanitarian personnel and assets. The deterioration of the security context is from 2017 to this year, in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, the incidents have quadrupled. And at the same time, we have another worrying trend, which is this expansion and intensification of violence is also is also accompanied by a multiplicity of actors. We have MINUSMA, the UN Stabilization Mission. We have the French Operation Barkhane. We have the EU training mission in Mali. We have the EU capacity building missions, the French-led Takuba Task Force, the G5 Sahel Joint Forces, the non-state armed groups, and of course the national armed groups. So a multiplicity of actors that we are working with, or that we should be working with. And yet on the ground, we see that this chronic poverty in the region, the levels of the effects of climate change, COVID-19 pandemic are all accelerating the deterioration of humanitarian needs in the region. At this time, 13.4 million people in these 3 countries need assistance. 1 in 5 people. That is a growing need in the region. That is also evident when we see the figures of displacement. Displacement in the region has risen to really very, very high levels. In Burkina Faso, in 2018, we had 70,000 IDPs, internally displaced persons, and this year we're counting 1 million. And this leads to not only disrupting livelihoods, farming, etc., but it also creates tensions with local communities and can also pressure already limited access to basic services. So the linkages between insecurity, conflict, and the worsening humanitarian context and the shrinking access that there is to basic services is evident. Yet the stabilization and counterterrorism agendas are setting the tone in this region, and the humanitarian space is shrinking. People's access to aid, but also to basic services, is affected. So reevaluating and improving civil-military coordination is really key.
Thank you, Menna, for paving the way for our discussion. You have mentioned the multiplicity of actors in the Sahel. What are the concrete challenges connected to successful and effective civil-military coordination in this specific region for an organization like the organization you're working for, RCF?
I mean, in terms of, there are many challenges, but I think in terms of the effective humanitarian civil-military coordination, I think the first one is the lack of quality dialogue with the military actors. To some extent, the relevance of information that we are sharing to ensure that those civil-military coordination meetings are not just security briefings, but actually discuss relevant issues, sharing the same criteria for decision-making, even for discussion, coordination with authorities, the adequate participation of humanitarians and military representatives. In some contexts, for example, in Niger, from the militaries, we only have the Nigerian forces participating, whereas we know that other international forces are engaged in military operations in the region. The level of, the rank of people that participate is very important, because that ensures, that whether we can actually engage in dialogue and decision-making on the spot and troubleshoot problems as they arise, and not having to resort back to superiors. So I think the quality of civil-military dialogue really is an issue, whereas on the other hand, probably there is lack of understanding of probably what I would call, like, in general, like, I think IHL, humanitarian principles, but also SIM card guidelines, and having at least a common understanding of those basics lack, and that is reflected in the discussions on these mechanisms. The imposition of armed escorts is a big challenge. This is a question that resurfaces continuously. Now we are in this dialogue again in Niger, because it was imposed a month ago, and there's high-level dialogue to really to see whether this can be limited, and this is armed escorts directly limit our capacity to reach people in need, because it needs to be an option of last resort where there is no civilian alternative and there is very high level of needs, and the lack of civilian alternatives still needs to be proven. So, and because of those reasons, we are not able to accept humanitarian, we're not able to accept armed escorts. In 2019, when escorts were imposed, in over a month that it took to negotiate again that those escorts were lifted, over 300 humanitarian field missions were cancelled. So this has very direct impact on our capacity to reach affected people. There is also the impact of counterterrorism measures. And for example, in some regions where a state of emergency is declared with the intention of limiting to counterterrorist attacks, for example, there is a ban on motorbikes. But that, for example, from what we see, limits people's ability to reach health centers. And on the other hand, some of these measures also, but also from the broader security context, makes that affect certain services. For example, in Tillaberi and Tawa in 2019 in Niger, 11 health centers were closed because health workers left fearing abduction. One last example that I would give is on the instrumentalization of aid, and here I think quick impact projects are a good example. No, the carrying out life-saving activities with the intention of gaining acceptance from populations, despite agreed upon measures, is really is an example of the kind of activities that really can lead to confusion of mandates and can erode our acceptance by communities. So for all these, I think improving civil military coordination and having a more symmetric, really, I think there is a lack of symmetry, and that really is very important to address, because it's important, to negotiate access, to negotiate, whether quick impact projects can take place in one region or another. So it's really central that we tackle these elements to improve civil military engagement.
Mm-hmm. And especially humanitarian actors have a very specific role to fill in those discussions. We have discussed this in earlier contexts as well, especially with, I don't know if you remember one of our briefing calls, I told this story about that actually one of our informants in Malian context said that he has the feeling that sometimes the military understands humanitarian principles better than other, for example, development actors. Still, there is a very specific humanitarian role. In your view, what defines their perspective of the issue of civil military coordination?
I mean, starting back, I mean, it's true that the role of humanitarians is key, but it is. I would like to start by saying that I think the role of states is crucial in the first place. I mean, in the sense that refraining from imposing armed escorts, limiting the consequence of counterterrorism measures, recognizing our need to negotiate access, those are very important elements. And then, of course, not only states, but international forces, their ability to ensure that their forces on the ground refrain from practices that have adverse consequences, like a quick impact project, as I was saying, I think is important. But then it's true, when we look at the relationship that we have with the military, there is a mutual mistrust between humanitarians and military actors. And this is a major drawback in civil military coordination. Humanitarians, probably, based on the experience that we are seeing in civil military mechanisms, we feel like there is a veto or, there's a predominance of the military agenda and the military interests that overrides the humanitarian agenda. So it is true that probably there is need for better engagement of military on IHL, on the mandate of humanitarians, the way humanitarians work. I think that the first thing is also that for us is to engage with the military. I think that in the sense of ensuring that, this can be, through the mechanism itself is a good platform in that sense, but engaging to clarify what our mandate is, what our limitations are, how we work, what are those modes of interventions that we have. I think that clarifying that, I think, is very important. But then I think as organizations, probably one of the things that we can improve is also that the kind of evidence that we gather. I think that as humanitarian organizations, the impact of this approach, the impact of armed escorts being imposed in one region, or the impact of counterterrorism measures and what that means for communities, our ability to demonstrate the humanitarian impact and to show in terms of lives, in terms of number of people who are not able to reach. I think those are the kind of very concrete things that probably gathering evidence and demonstrating this kind of adverse impact of such practices, I think that in one sense can be very, very powerful. On the other hand, I think that mobilizing states, there are last week we had the Sahel conference on the ministerial roundtable, and there was, aside from financial pledges, there was a lot of political support and political pledges. No, in that sense, I think that engaging with influential states. It's true that here engaging directly with the state is difficult because of the risks, the operational risk that this has for organizations on the ground. But I think engaging with mobilizing influential states, I think, is important to ensure that we hold them also accountable for this kind of pledges, and to ensure that they can contribute to improving the humanitarian space that at this point is shrinking. So I think there is more that we can do also to engage from these perspectives, but it's true from a constructive way, that definitely.
Thanks for pointing out also to the role of the states. That actually makes me think, what difference do you see between engaging with state military or state armed actors versus non-state armed actors, of which we also have a lot, especially in the West African region?
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to one of the points that I was trying to make, that one of the when we engage with the state armed forces, we already have, for example, in Mali, the national forces, most of the time they don't even come to those to the civil military coordination mechanism. So that is a very basic element that is lacking. No, but it's true that there are structures to engage with them. But then, if we look at the case of Niger, one of the challenges that we have is the limitation that we have in terms of engaging with non-state armed groups, because that is not recognized, and the government does not want to recognize our mandate to negotiate with them. So we actually find ourselves in a very, very difficult spot, because the state does not want, resists that we negotiate with them, because they see that then as them not having control over their territories. So then we go into a complex issue where actually we cannot negotiate with those that actually have effective control of on the ground. So this is the kind of reality that we have.
Yes, thank you, Menna. Before I would like to hand over to my colleague Darina, I'm going to pose the question of, you have mentioned a lot of things that are not going well at the moment from your last 12 years of experience in the sector. Do you have an example where a good version of civil military coordination actually brought evidence and results to access or a better service, humanitarian service?
That's a very difficult question, because in terms of positive examples, I think there are some positive steps that are being taken right now that will hopefully lead us to positive developments. Like, for instance, the creation of, in Mali and Niger recently, there is the creation of high-level mechanisms to dialogue platforms to tackle access issues between the government, the UN, and NGOs, etc. So that, we think, can be very useful. It's definitely a promising initiative, because then all the issues that within the civil military coordination mechanisms are not being tackled then can be tackled at a higher level, and we hope that would be a positive development. I mean, one probably good example would be that in 2019, when there was imposition of armed escorts in Niger, as I was telling you, with the consequences of suspension of many field missions. In that sense, the mobilization of the humanitarian community led to that being lifted after, I think it was around 6 weeks or 2 months of negotiations. In that sense, I don't know whether that points necessarily to the good civil military experience or more to a positive, mobilizing capacity of the humanitarian community to ensure that, those that issue was addressed. It's still very a temporary advance. But for example, in Niger, in the last since beginning of 2020, in the regions that were not classified, under emergency, state of emergency, we have moved away from, seeking authorizations to movement notifications. So that is positive because it actually improves our capacity to deliver, and that we can move in a quick manner, especially in a region where we have a rapid response mechanism, and it is very important that we are able to respond quickly. So in that sense, but still we're still quite far from seeing positive examples to share in this regard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's still a lot to do, even though I'm quite happy to see that humanitarian coordination and also mobilization brings about positive change. Maybe this can also lead as an example for many things we have discussed today. Meanwhile, my colleague Darina has arrived. Darina, what's going on in the chat?
Hi, Andrea, and thank you for the very interesting discussion. I've brought 2 questions for you here. The first one is about fragmentation. So Philippa Schmitz-Guinot, whom we heard earlier today, is asking, Menna, do you think that a civil-military coordination and the dialogue with military actors is actually too fragmented across the many humanitarian actors that are present on the ground? And following up on this, how much of that dialogue should be bilateral and how much should be collective? That's the first one. And secondly, I hope I got these questions correctly. The question is posed by Abukar Gal, and he says, well, we are always talking about the peace component and thus also civil-military relations, introducing a new political dimension to the humanitarian work. But what about actually external business interests and political interventions from, for example, superpowers or neighboring countries? So these are the 2 questions I brought for you here, and I would like to hand over to you with that.
Okay, Menna, please feel free to jump right into it.
Yes, I mean, with regards to the first one on fragmentation, I mean, that is, for instance, when I was with the example that I was sharing on Niger, that is one of the challenges that we had in terms of sometimes the structures that are there within, especially within armed groups, within non-state armed groups, is quite challenging. And that is, for instance, one of the things that we've been talking about. For example, I was listening to some of the discussions this morning about context analysis, no? And it's true that context analysis is not only within the communities, it also needs to be about those actors and understanding who they are and understanding the chain of command that they have and the extension of command that they have and all those things. And it's true that is a very challenging question, especially for organizations like us to navigate. No? So it's true that then it brings to the second point that I wanted to, I think it's very much related with regards to the bilateral and collective actions. No? I think that is where collectively this kind of analysis can be very positive to do this kind of analysis and to navigate the systems collectively. But then having a collectively coherent action would also be very positive in the sense that one of the challenges that we have is that as humanitarian actors, we also need to improve our coherence in how we are acting, but also how we are being perceived. And it's true that that may be easier, somewhat easier, when we are engaging with state actors or national forces who probably have know us more or know us better also through, but it's true that when it's related to non-state armed groups, that is more challenging. So to have a common approach, I think, is a very positive, can be a very positive thing, and ensuring that we have a common, at least within organizations. No, it's true that we cannot have a nationwide access strategy on how to engage with them, but at least for the different regions, I think that there is still possibility for us to have a common analysis and have a common way of engaging with them. Also, in a way, somehow to ensure that there is the coherence, and to improve this kind of and to launch also this kind of dialogue. So in that sense, for me, collective action definitely can be very very positive, because sometimes also related to coherence. In some parts of the Sahel as well, the fact that one organization is negotiating with an armed group and another is not also creates tension within the humanitarian community, because some are perceived as being less neutral because they're negotiating, or some, because they're not negotiating, are more neutral. So there are also these elements between us that need to be better. I think there is also lack of clarity. So in that sense, the more we engage collectively or have a common strategy, I think that can be positive. On the second question on the interests from other countries, I think at the end, whether we're talking about how the security agenda is undermining the other agendas, development or humanitarian agendas, or migration agenda, we are seeing that the solutions on the ground are far from what actually, at least, are not comprehensive in what the communities need. So in that sense, for us, it is important that we work also with those countries. For example, at this point, there are opportunities. The EU is revising its Sahel strategy. We can influence also, this integrated strategy, this integrated approach that is being operationalized. The nexus, the triple nexus, is still to be launched operationalized in that context. So there is a lot of opportunities for us to make sure that within the mandate of each of us, to ensure that those interests are limited, and we are all working to really what the needs of those people are, and in coherence with the priorities that we see. So in that sense, I think working with those countries, and I think is very useful.
Thank you, Menna, for this really enlightening response to the chat questions. I think also for the humanitarian sector to actually engage in what you've just pointed out, we also need to agree on what is the evidence we need to agree on, so we can move further, right? So this is one of the things that we are trying to establish here, and that we are kind of trying to at least create the links between people to do so. It was my real pleasure to engage with you, Menna. I hope we will do so in the near future, especially with regard to the Sahel, but also with more general questions of civil military coordination. Thank you so much, and see you soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
We will take a very short break now of 1 minute maximum to set everything up, and then welcome you back soon.